Okay, this is the third video in our Module 1 Introduction to World Regional Geography, and what we're going to be doing here is talking a little bit about the concept of region. Again, many of the things that we're going to see here are related to Joseph Hobbs' Fundamentals of World Regional Geography, third edition. So again, I appreciate the contributions. Let's begin with what the text defines as the major world regions. And what you can see here is the United States and Canada, Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, Middle East, North Africa, Europe, Russia, and the near abroad, South and East Asia, and then Oceania. Now, different texts and different geographers will divide the world into slightly different world regions. For example, some might see Latin America and the Caribbean as two distinct subregions, or might call the United States and Canada Anglo or North America. In addition, the Russian realm is sometimes defined somewhat differently than we see it here. But again, the concept of regions is important in terms of a classification scheme that geographers use to understand the human landscape. One of the ways that we want to understand regions then is into three subcategories. And these are important subcategories that we will use throughout the class in World Regional Geography. So let's begin with a formal region. One way to understand the formal region is to say that these are regions that we can understand the boundaries of in terms of almost geopolitical boundaries. So, for example, these are, and this is according to the Geocurrents map website, but it's a great example of how boundaries, formal boundaries, characterize different aspects of region. And so we can look at these as administrative divisions and see how we understand regions. But formal regions have boundaries. These are boundaries that are well understood and well agreed upon. We can also see that some of these boundaries are rather interesting and rather dynamic, especially today in terms of globalization and how we understand our world. And one of the points that I want to make is, again, this is from the Geocurrents webpage, that some boundaries or borders are very hard borders, that is, borders that actually have a physical barrier to them. For example, the U.S.-Mexican border, we can see, for example, that in parts of that there is a physical wall present. This is also true in the state of Israel. There are also, though, separation borders that are proposed and may or may not exist in the future. But there's also the other side of that, and that is borders that are on maps, but really are very difficult to see on the ground. And the great example of that is the Schengen region or Schengen area within the European Union. And throughout this region, what you see here in blue, are state boundaries that are certainly present on the maps and are well understood geopolitically, but in fact on the ground are very difficult to observe. In many cases you can cross a Schengen border without really realizing that you've gone from one area to the other than perhaps a small sign. So formal regions are these things that we use to define our world in terms of geopolitical boundaries. We can also think, though, about functional regions. And the easiest way I want you to think about functional regions is to describe it in terms of relationships across space to a central point or function, if you will. So, for example, I can say Slippery Rock is a phenomenon in space. Slippery Rock University, located right about here, is a phenomenon in space. But around Slippery Rock, we have a functional region that is defined by the distance that people would have to travel to get there. In other words, the commuter student region. And what we have here are 5, 10, and 15-minute drive distances, as calculated in ArcGIS, to Slippery Rock University. So that 15-minute functional region in terms of our commuter distance. And we can, in fact, see how that might define a region. But it's not a region that has political boundaries. It is simply a functional boundary in terms of how far people can commute in a given time. Now, the last type of region that we will often talk about are what we call vernacular regions. And vernacular regions are regions that are well understood. In fact, it's quite easy to know when you're inside one. but the boundaries are somewhat amorphous or sometimes very difficult to pin down. And one great example of vernacular region definition occurred in the New York Times when the New York Times used Facebook data to characterize college football regions. And in this case, vernacular regions were kind of defined by how many people in the area affiliated with one team or the other. And we can kind of see this as vernacular regions of college football. And what we see in this area is that we clearly have a Pitt vernacular region, in other words, the region of Pitt football fans. And then as you move to the east, you see it break down and it becomes the Penn State football region, vernacular region. And so this is a way that we see this kind of amorphous edge. Clearly, when you're at Penn State, you know you're in Penn State football region. And when you're at Pitt, you know you're in Pitt. But between those, the edge is somewhat soft. So with that, we've examined three types of regions: formal, functional, and vernacular. And we've examined at least the beginning concept of a world regional map and how we understand the regions that we're going to look at in this class. So that's it for this video. We'll pick it up with Geographer's Tools next time.